really over the last 7, 8 years now, we've automated a ton of processes, but we've also talked to and obviously work with a lot of people who, so human beings that want to automate, and some of them have gone on to do fantastic things and automate and get lots done, and others have sort of not as much as so much as these other people anyway. So really what I wanted to do was talk about, from a purely observational point, 7 traits or habits or things that I see in some of these people that seem to do really, really well with their automation initiatives. So the first is really about re-engineering, and one about being careful when it comes to re-engineering. So I think anyone who and I imagine a lot of these people in this room have a natural compulsion to look at a process, particularly a messy one that's been done manually for a long time, and your instant reaction is, I need to clean it up. It's messy. This can be done better. The challenge with that is it very quickly becomes like pulling on the threads of a sock, because you might say, okay, well, maybe I'm just going to clean up this step and this step. And then you realize that the steps you're cleaning up have a whole bunch of other steps that are dependent on it. And then likewise and likewise. And before you know it, the whole thing is unraveling. And the problem with that is what started off as a nice, neat, contained project has ended up as a completely different project. You're actually building something entirely different to what you started out doing. You're testing, and it's an entirely new solution, essentially. So you haven't even got valid things to test against, because it's entirely different to the manual process that you were first looking at. So with that first point, the people who, people who sort of just, again, through observation over the years, they're quite careful about re-engineering, and they consider upfront the costs that re-engineering will have. So they do it early on, and they plan to the end. So they'll look at that and they'll say, yes, I want to re-engineer as part of this initiative, but you really have those conversations at the planning stage when you're considering the resources that you'll need to automate. They balance their own desire to re-engineer and to clean up with the actual needs for automation in the first place. And sometimes they acknowledge that it's better to start by automating the as-is process, get some wins there, and then look at re-engineering in the future when you have a bit of free time. The second thing is around, and this is a fairly obvious one, picking the right process to start with. So the first process is so important, because it's all about building momentum. It gets excitement. It's what gets people's heads popping around the corner saying, hey, what have you done? And I heard something was really, really successful. I want to sort of build on that. So it's really important to pick a process that is significant and meaningful and important enough to get people's attention. But with that being said, you want something that's also doable. So avoiding a moving target is one obvious thing. Picking a process where the subject matter knowledge is there, when you can look at the people that you're working with and you know with confidence that they know what they're talking about when they talk about the process, is really, really important as well. Because if you don't, it really deflates the enthusiasm for automation overall. So if you pick a bad project to start with, one that's too hard, it's too complex, where the knowledge isn't there, it fails, and then it becomes really, really hard to sort of justify going on why you should keep automating. So one obvious thing there is we actually have a checklist on our website of some good characteristics for processes that you want to automate. The second is really defining the need payoff. So looking at that particular process and understanding the why behind, why do you truly want to automate it? And then, as I said, picking a process where the subject matter experts that work on that process actually understand and know the subject matter behind that process. Third is that they work with and not against IT. So this is a big one. Particularly in large companies, there tends to be some natural friction between IT and business, and a lot of the time that's because the types of processes people want to automate are the processes that have been sort of left behind by the core IT initiatives. And then all of a sudden they come along and they say, look, we've actually found a way and we want to automate this process XYZ. And IT's first reaction is usually to say, like, hold on a second, like, what are you doing? That we can do that. And and then it sort of goes back and forth from there. And the reality is it's really all about perspective, because every one of us have 100 things to do, and every one of us can really only do about 10 things. And then if somebody comes along and they want to do the 11th and 12th thing that we wanted to do or think that we can do, we would all probably react the same way with the hold on a second, that 11th and 12th thing are things that I think that I can do. And the people who seem to do really well with the automation agendas, they work really hard to approach it from both perspectives. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. They really wire their automation goals into IT's own goals, because at the end of the day, IT, they want a lot of the same things that the business wants. They want the customers to be looked after. They want efficiency. They want people to enjoy work. And the analogy we often use is that you think of this line that extends outside the door of IT and down the hall. Automation is really helping the people that are at the back of that line and giving them something that they can use. And if they ever reach a point where they're actually make it to the front of that queue where IT can help them, then great. But in the meantime, people need something to help them to get their work done. Number 4 is that they carefully plan and lock in their resources. I'm guessing a lot of people in this room have been in projects that have felt a little bit like this. I definitely have. So it starts off in week 1, everyone's really excited, everyone turns up to the project meeting. 1 week later, there's usually a lot of empty seats. And then a week after that, everyone's back, but then you're just trying to figure out what it is that you were doing. And the whole thing just seems to go through this loop. And that happens when resources are borrowed for projects, particularly automation projects. So they're not dedicated. It's this person and this person, pull them in for an hour, see if you can get the thing going. And then naturally they get pulled onto other initiatives and you're just constantly fighting. So it creates a lot of friction. So one of the things there is really avoiding borrowing staff. You want to plan to the end, you want staff dedicated, and you want to plan to run the project at full momentum. And executives are really important as well, because you need someone who's going to sort of swat away the hands as they come to pull people out of the project. Following on from the previous point, keeping executives engaged is also really, really important. So every executive, every senior manager in the world, if you go to them and say, I want to do a project that saves time, saves money, makes us more efficient, they're all going to say yes. And that sounds great. The problem is the moment that meeting ends, a million other people come and want their time and their attention and their focus. And pretty soon, those people, for no fault of their own, they start being some of the empty seats in those project meetings. They start slowly dropping off the main project. And the problem that creates is, again, connected to the previous point. It becomes hard to start swatting away the hands that are trying to pull resources out of the project. It also starts to, and I think this is the worst thing, is that it starts to send a very secret, a very covert signal that the project doesn't matter. And that deflates the enthusiasm of the people involved as well. So people who really can get these automation initiatives off the ground, they find sponsors who are passionate about the project. They set expectations for the life of the project from beginning to end. And they're really prepared to work hard to keep the attention of that sponsor, of that exec for the life of the project. Number 6 is around having clarity on what success actually means. So this is actually a real example from a few years ago. So you have a process that was taking 240 minutes to do manually, and it gets cut down to 5 minutes when it's automated. But 3 of those 5 minutes is around going and pulling data manually from a GL system to upload that into Solvexia. So the question is that process a success? And depending on who you talk to at the time, some people would say yes, because you're saving all this time. Whereas other people were saying, no, this is not, I don't call this automation because I'm still having to manually go and pull some data from a system. And the hard part is, unless you've really clarified what success means in terms of what you're trying to solve, it's very hard to argue the case for or against. So clarity is a lot of the stock standard stuff. It's having a proper understanding of what your goals of automation are. Why are you trying to save time? Are you trying to reduce errors by a certain percentage? And what the implications are behind that? Because generally, everybody wants to save time. That's sort of meaningless. But most of the time you want to, why do you want to save time? It's because I want to be able to go home on a Friday night and spend time with my family and my kids over the weekend and get my work done. I don't just want to get my numbers more accurate. I want to be able to sleep at night, not worrying that the regulator is going to pull me up. So really understanding the goals and understanding the why behind automation is really, really important. And then number 7 is equipping the team with the right skills. So we're a long way away from having robots building robots. So until then, it's still reliant on people to configure the robots. And from our observations, the sort of perfect automation team has a mixture of things. There's people with procedural thinking skills, so people who can think in structure and look at process and speak the language of process. We often say it's the person, if you go to them and say, tell me how this process works, and they will explain it almost like explaining the recipe to make a cake. So, this is where I start, this is the middle, and this is the end. That's when you know you're onto a winner in terms of someone who can think in process. The other is you need some form of project management skills along the way, whether that's expectation management, managing the different resources. You need lobbyists in the team, so people who can jump around the different business units. And if that means you need some new extract to be created in system XYZ, you need someone who can go and pitch that case to IT to work with them. And you need the focus and you need the energy and time. And part of it is about finding people who already have those skills, but there's really so many options online today as well for things like that. I did a very quick Google. So there's a $45 half an hour course that teaches people the basics of process mapping. So you could throw that in front of somebody who's never done any process mapping before and get them a little closer to that form of thinking. Similarly, there's project management foundation courses that run for an hour on these sites like Lynda and things like that. So there's plenty of tools and services out there that can also help raise the level of skills and knowledge in the team as well. So just to recap, so the seven traits that we see that really help people with automation is being careful about re-engineering, picking that right first process, working with IT, adequately resourcing to the end of the project and keeping the execs engaged, knowing what success actually means and being able to measure it, and having the right skills in the team.